All right, with the Sixers making the playoffs and playing the Celtics, all I kept hearing was that the Sixers haven't beaten the Celtics in the playoffs since Moses and Doc were playing basketball. I figured, well, we should get somebody who's written about Moses and Doc. So we've got our next guest, Luke Epplin, and his new book is Moses and the Doctor: Two Men, One Championship, and the Birth of Modern Basketball. All the more makes it all the more relevant here. Luke, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, I got a question for you. You've written other books, you've written baseball books. How did you decide that this was the next story you were ready to tell?
Well, it's actually because of my baseball book. I wrote a baseball book called Our Team, which was about the second Black player to come into Major League Baseball, which was Larry Doby. And I really love this idea of like two separate leagues that existed independent of each other and thus sort of developed different ideologies, different styles of play, things like that. That would be the major leagues and the Negro leagues. And when they come together, it creates a lot of tension because of the differences between the players. And so my favorite sport is basketball. And I thought to myself, was there ever a time in basketball where something similar happened? And it would have been when the American Basketball Association started, which would have been in the late 60s, went through the mid 70s. And that's was the fascinating thing because it was such a different league than the NBA. It was looser, it was faster, it had more of a playground feel to it. So I wanted to get into there. And who's the best player to get into there? It's Julius Erving. He looks like the ABA, he played like the ABA, he was the ABA. And so that's where I started.
So, how important was Dr. J coming over to the Sixers to the eventual merger of the NBA and the ABA?
The fascinating thing about Dr. J and the ABA is that he was unheralded coming out of high school. He was pretty unheralded coming out of college. He was a quintessential playground player. He made his name at Rucker Park in New York City. And he was doing moves that people just didn't hear of before. And so he was what I would call the last legend in sports. And by that, I mean, you had to sort of hear about Dr. J. The ABA games were not televised. They didn't have a national television contract. You couldn't see him. So all of the sort of things going through who Dr. J was passed word of mouth. And so the hype of Dr. J coming into the NBA was tremendous. It was similar to in my previous book when Satchel Paige came over to the major leagues. Finally, fans were going to see who this guy was and what he could do. It was very similar to Julius Erving. Is the legend actually real? So when he comes over to the Sixers, they're just selling out games left and right. And it's all because of the sort of mythology that's been built up around him.
You talked about how the ABA was looser, faster. Do you think that the Dr. J that we eventually got to know and love would have become the same player if he had started in the NBA, which was a more rigid league, than starting in the ABA?
It's a really good question. So here's what I would say how Julius Erving really changed the game because there were people before him, Elgin Baylor, Connie Hawkins, Jumpin' Joe Green, you name it. They really kind of brought some of the elements of what we would call the playground game into professional basketball with their certain moves, starting on one side of the basket, finishing on the other, interesting dunks, things like that. What Julius Erving did was from a very early age, if you look at some of the earliest interviews with Dr. J, he's talking about himself as an artist. And so he's thinking about basketball as an art form, and he's knowing that there are certain ways of playing that are more interesting and beautiful than others. And so he doesn't just kind of do those moves. He goes to the playground and practices as if he were shooting a free throw. He'll be out there hundreds of times, starting on one end of the basket, finishing on the other, until he has it down so pat that it's fundamental to his style of play. And so the NBA was really a coach oriented league that valued sort of, fundamentals and following patterns and things like this. A lot of times, if you brought something like that into the NBA, the coaches would sit you, they'd yell at you, they'd say it wasn't sort of fundamental to the way that we play here. Dr. J made it so that you couldn't say that. If he does a move like he does, let's say starting on one end of the basket, finishing on the other, coaches would have to say, well, that was a high percentage shot because he'd done it so often. And so I think that like if the coaches could really understand who he was and what he was doing, they would have seen that he wasn't just, a show like a flair player, a showcase player. So it remains to be who knows, but I would say the ABA was the laboratory that allowed him to fully unleash those powers and explore what he could do in a professional setting. I don't know if he would have been able to have that full sort of freedom in the NBA.
You've talked about how if Julius Erving doesn't come first, Michael Jordan might not become the player we know today. Can you
Mhm.
expand on that?
So, like I said, Julius Erving was the one who really, the way that I would say it is he professionalized the playground. A lot of my book at the beginning talks about the differences between what I call the outdoor game and the indoor game. Basketball is unique among sports developed in the United States, whether it's football, basketball, I mean, baseball, whatever, in that it was conceived as an indoor activity. And the indoor game was always about coaches, fundamentals, the ball moving from station to station. But then courts started going up in sort of vacant lots and things like that around cities across the country. And particularly urban youths, primarily African Americans, were styling a new sort of game that was more outdoor focused. It had flair, it had creativity, it was very player oriented. And the sort of challenge that Dr. J had was to show that that style of basketball, the outdoor game, could be just as effective and winning as the indoor game. And so he needed that championship in Philadelphia in 1983, not only to validate his own legacy, but to show that that style of play and the ABA could produce just as much winning basketball as the style in the NBA. So he is fighting so many different fronts at the start to show that what he's doing is in fact just as good as the way that the game has always been played. By the time Michael Jordan comes around and he's playing a very similar game because he's looking at Dr. J as a model, he doesn't have to prove that what he's doing could produce winning basketball. It's already been shown that that can be winning basketball. And so he doesn't have to fight that fight, and he can just sort of be himself right from the start. And so he doesn't fight those battles that Julius does, and he steps right into that path that Julius has blazed, gets that shoe deal right away, becomes the face of the league. He doesn't have to sort of like, it's not a proving grounds in the way that it was. And so it's not necessarily that Michael Jordan couldn't have been Michael Jordan. It's that Julius Erving helped him be that from the start.
And yet, Moses Malone is the three-time MVP.
Mm-hmm.
We get to a couple minutes into the interview before we bring him up either. Why isn't he talked more about today? And if he played in the age of social media, do you think he would have gotten more attention?
No,
No.
no, I don't think so. He just, if I said at the beginning that Julius Erving could sense that there was a different aesthetics of basketball that was more beautiful, Moses Malone almost purposely made his job more ugly. He was very like Julius is talking about himself as an artist. Moses is talking about himself as a laborer. He's thinking of blue collar work. He's thinking of sweat. He's thinking of all of these different things. He used to tape games and watch himself to see how much he was sweating. And if he wasn't sweating as much as he wanted to be sweating, he knew that he wasn't working hard enough. And so he's really somebody who doesn't have any interest in sort of, playing to the crowd or anything like that. And he's just the opposite of Julius Erving in so many ways. I think I said at the beginning there that I started with Julius and I did not know that it was going to be sort of a dual bio with him and Moses. And it was only really whenever I was sort of researching Erving's arc and seeing that Moses gave him that necessary component that he needed to be able to win a championship in the NBA that I started saying, wait a minute, these two guys are so opposite of each other, not only on the court where one's an artist and one's a laborer, but off the court where Julius is signing every autograph, talking to every reporter, doing whatever the NBA needs him to do. And Moses is doing none of that. And it just struck me that like, you could put these two guys in tension with each other and show two completely separate paths down the NBA, but also seeing that if these two come together, they fill in what the other lacks.
And you had oil and water, and they did work.
Yeah.
What made these two guys work together?
So Julius, when he comes into the NBA, he makes it to the finals 3 different times without Moses. The Sixers have the most wins in the NBA from 1976 to 1983. They more wins than the Celtics, more wins than the Lakers. They just don't have that championship. And, Erving's strength is attacking the basket, creating, defense in some ways, but he needs people there to do the dirty work what that he, is too busy to do. They did not have good, effective rebounders. They had Daryl Dawkins, who was a disappointment. They had Caldwell Jones, who was an excellent player, but maybe not of the level that Erving needed. And then you look at Moses, who's on the Houston Rockets. They make it to the finals, but they're doing it just completely ugly. They don't have like that dynamic player like Julius Erving that can take the load off of Moses. They both needed some sort of player that could fill in what the other couldn't do. And so once they came together, it's amazing how well they clicked together. They just immediately tore through the NBA. Julius Erving thought that it was going to take them a couple of months to feel each other out, to get used to each other. That wasn't the case. It was almost like those two were meant to be together.
How important was it, Moses saying it was Dr. J's team?
Oh, tremendously. I talked to so many different people on those Sixers teams. And you have to remember that Moses, before he joins the Sixers, was the MVP of 1982. Julius was the MVP of 1981. So you're taking the last two MVPs and putting them together on the same team. Moses is the only player at that time to have won an MVP and then join another team the next year through free agency. And so there was a lot of understandable concern about, would Moses Malone come to that team and say, I'm the MVP, I'm much younger, this is going to be my team now. And for him to immediately say, this is Doc's team, and I'm just here to help Dr. J get over the hump and win the championship. And he repeats that in his very first press conference. He repeats that at the start of training camp, and he repeats that after his first game. The other members of the Sixers really picked up on that and sort of recognized that he's coming here deferring to Julius as the sort of elder statesman. He's not coming in here to throw his weight around. He's coming in here to be a team player. And, I think that he was making a lot more than Julius Erving. And it put Julius Erving a little bit at ease too, to know that there wasn't going to be a sort of struggle session between them.
It seems to me the one thing they did have in common was this supreme confidence in not only their abilities, but the abilities of the team, especially in 1983.
Yeah, the great part about writing this book is not only getting to know someone like Moses, who, I wasn't really old enough to see him play, but I was worried about being able to find out who he was because he hardly ever talked. But it was so much fun to research him. But it was also fun to research the other Sixers because you have so many guys on that team: Bobby Jones, Maurice Cheeks, Andrew Toney, folks like that who were Hall of Fame caliber players. Two of those are, in fact, in the Hall of Fame, who have kind of fallen out of the wayside. They're not the most vocal players. They weren't, say, the most flashy players. Bobby Jones is known for his defense. Maurice Cheeks was another one of these guys like Moses who just did not want to talk to the press. Yet these were some of the most exciting people in the NBA, and to try to elevate them as well into the narrative was really fun for me to do, and challenging because, as I said, Maurice Cheeks, try to crack that guy. I went through 8 different ways trying to get to him. He just would not talk to me. He just doesn't talk to the press. And Andrew Toney is another guy. He hasn't given an interview to any media outlet since he retired in the 80s. And that includes my book. Just was very nice about it, but just refused to talk.
Why do you think the Sixers of that era don't get more recognition like the Lakers and the Celtics do? And to go with that, is the Magic versus Bird save the NBA narrative incomplete without Dr. J?
Absolutely. One of the things that I learned while doing this book, is that if you look at the Sixers from whenever Julius Erving joins the team in 1976, Julius Erving never plays with fewer than 2 other ABA superstars on his team, whether that's George McGinnis, Caldwell Jones, Bobby Jones, Moses Malone. And so he's stocked with ABA players on that team. And the Sixers themselves, because they take on the characteristic of Julius Erving, become kind of coded as the ABA team of that era. And you take on Magic and Bird, who are not ABA superstars, who join teams that do not have a lot of ABA stars. In fact, in '83, whenever the Sixers played the Lakers didn't have anybody who played on the ABA on that team. it becomes almost like the Sixers become the ABA stand-in. And the NBA has never been quick to really recognize and celebrate the ABA. It's almost like Magic and Bird gave them the fresh start they needed to craft a narrative forward for the modern era of the ABA, and I mean the NBA. And it's perfect because you've got two guys with tremendously differing characteristics. You've got extroverted, introverted, white, black, Boston, LA. It's just you couldn't have scripted it better. But by only focusing on them, it really does take away, especially Julius Erving. I mean, it's ridiculous to try to assume that Magic and Bird made the NBA modern because Julius Erving was really the one, as I said, who sets the template for the most exciting players, Jordan to Kobe to Anthony Edwards or whatever. Like that lineage all flows through Julius Erving. So I just think that like there's still some sort of ABA prejudice that takes down those teams a notch.
I was going to ask that. How much did the ABA versus NBA culture clash influence both how the players were viewed then, but then going forward, how the stories are written now? Because they weren't written at a time then where they were equals. So
Yeah.
now when it's reflected upon, they're not in the story.
Well, it's interesting. So if you look at whenever Julius Erving joins the Sixers in 1976, he comes onto a team with George McGinnis as the primary superstar. George McGinnis was an MVP in the ABA before he crossed over to the NBA. And by pairing those two, Julius and George McGinnis, they created this like super team that was ultra playground focused. And they had a bunch of other really colorful stars, Daryl Dawkins, World Be Free, Joe Jellybean Bryant, all of these interesting players. But the NBA was really threatened by that Sixers team. They thought it's when they played the Trailblazers in the finals, you can read the coverage at the time. It's almost existential. It's like if the Sixers win this championship, that's it. It's just playground from here on out. The players are going to take over the league. They needed the Trailblazers to win, not only because of sort of the white nature of Bill Walton and Jack Ramsey and stuff like that. There was a huge racial component there, but also just because that style that they did, which was very heavily choreographed by Jack Ramsey, the Blazers coach, was the style that the NBA needed to prevail. And so, yeah, it was denigrated. The ABA was thought of as a minor league, as a beach ball league, things like that. And without footage to really see for yourself, it was harder for fans to sort of rebut that almost, and it remains hard for fans to rebut that. That of course is changing. I mean, as you probably know, there was a huge ABA documentary that just came out, and that got a ton of press, and it's done a lot to rev up the ABA a little bit. But if you notice, the NBA still doesn't, they still really don't. They don't play with ABA balls. They don't really celebrate the ABA players. They haven't incorporated ABA statistics into the NBA statistics. I mean, there's still very much a sort of it's not they it's more just kind of an ignoring of the ABA.
Why?
I mean, I guess the rift is still there, but I wish I could tell you that. I don't know. And especially because as you know, there are four ABA teams that are in the NBA, some of which are the best teams in the league. The Spurs and the Nuggets are still playing. There's a lot you could do to celebrate. The Nuggets in particular were a tremendous ABA team. There's a lot you could do to celebrate that, but you wouldn't know that. I mean, if you look at sort of the history of the Nuggets as the NBA sort of treats it, it kind of goes back to Dan Issel to Dikembe Mutombo and onward. It's not like they celebrate the championships that they want to take.
It just seems like they're losing an opportunity. They're missing an opportunity.
Missing a marketing opportunity.
Yeah, not just a
Tremendous.
marketing opportunity, but history matters, especially now. And here's a
Yeah.
chance for them to celebrate that history because the ABA, it's not just the four teams that merged, it's the players that came over and advanced the game
Yeah.
beyond where it was at the time.
And I mean, if you want to talk marketing, the ABA was styled back then as cool because Dr. J was the coolest guy in basketball at that time. And that red, white, and blue ball is pretty dang cool still. And I mean, they're just missing so many opportunities to create the jerseys, create the balls, like play sort of throwback ABA games. I do think that fans would really cotton to that. And for them not to do that, it just really seems like stubbornness on their part. But I couldn't go into why that is the case. I just think that there is still sort of a chauvinism that has never fully fallen off. And if you, I mean, again, if you read the papers back then, people like Red Auerbach of the Boston Celtics really were just like, the ABA is not a league. Like they're just a bunch of running gunners. You know, I mean, he said the same of Julius Erving. He was like, Erving is sure he's good over there, but put him over here and he's just another player. So it's just, I mean, you heard that too in the major leagues. They used to say that about Negro League players all the
Yeah.
time. So it is a sort of the dominant league looking down at the secondary league.
Last question I have is with regard to the Sixers, do you think they would be thought of more or more kindly if they had won that second championship?
Yes, I do. I do. I think that there was a real opportunity for them in the 70s when Julius Erving comes over to establish a dynasty. The fact that they lose to the Trailblazers and then Julius Erving and George McGinnis can just never click together. It just really created Julius Erving's legacy went from one of awe to disappointment. I'll tell you, I knew I had a book when I was first researching was I was looking at some articles from 1982, and after Julius Erving loses to the Lakers in 1982, he is in the locker room and they close the locker room down. Nobody can come in because Julius Erving broke down and cried. And as I said, Julius Erving is the coolest guy on the court. He didn't show emotion. For him to cry was really something. And I couldn't understand. He wouldn't talk about it. So I was like, that's the moment right there. Why is Julius Erving crying in 1982 after losing his third trip to the finals? And it really is because he thought that that opportunity he had to form some sort of dynasty or win championships was gone. He had no idea that Moses was going to come. And so his championship comes a little bit too late for him to start a dynasty. But just even that one championship flips that script so that we don't think of him anymore as somebody who was tremendous in the air, but didn't quite have what it took to win the championship.
Not sure what preconceived ideas you went into this book with, but did your view change when you heard stories and research about Moses or Julius while writing the book?
Yes, tremendously so. As I might have mentioned, I was really nervous about Moses. He came into my research much later. I thought it was just going to be about Julius Erving. And I told my editor, I think I can talk to Julius Erving, which I did. I can talk to the teammates, but Moses is gone. And as we know, he never talked to the press. You had to really kind of dig and dig and dig and dig to find him making any sort of substantive statements. But what I found was that if you did dig enough and you just went day by day by day by day, there would be days where Moses would open up, or there would be reporters around whom Moses felt comfortable. And when he did talk, he made it count. And so I think that in some ways, Moses said more than even Julius Erving did, because Erving had perfected the art of speaking in cliches. He'd perfected the art of sort of filling a reporter's notebooks with things that he needed for his beat story the next day. Moses, when he talked, he often had something to say, and it was straight to the point and substantive. And I think you can see that in the fact that Moses is the one who coined two phrases that we still think about. Moses coined in the 1981 finals, he said that he could take four guys from his hometown in Petersburg and beat the Celtics by himself. I think he believed that. And then he coined, of course, the most famous phrase, which is faux, 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 which was the Sixers sweeping the finals or the playoffs in 1983. If they had asked that question to Dr. J and said, how do you think you're going to do in the playoffs? He would have given you paragraphs worth of like, well, it's going to be challenging. We got some good teams, blah, 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 blah. And we never would have remembered any of it. But Moses cut it down to its essence. And so I really thought that like Moses was more thoughtful, funny, interesting, and he could carry his own in such a way. And in some ways, as I said, it was harder to get to the real Dr. J because you have to strip the cliches. and they're there, but you had to dig and dig and dig with him too.
Before we let you go, what do you hope younger fans in 2026 take away about this era and these players?
It's an interesting time in the NBA because the league is in dire straits. There's drug problems, there's financial problems, there's violence problems. The Lakers and the Celtics have not matched up with each other yet. My book ends before the first Lakers Celtics matchup in the finals. And so I wanted to sort of show that there's this little mini era before, Bird and Magic really take over that is almost half of the 80s. And there were sort of, it wasn't just Magic and Bird. You have to sort of incorporate the Sixers into that fold. And so I wanted to sort of bring them back. I wanted to reintroduce Dr. J into that conversation. And then I just wanted to sort of put Moses into the spotlight. I mean, it's watch any sort of highlight reel that the NBA produces. Moses is never in there. There's not a lot of highlights that you could sort of find of him. And so it's hard to imagine. He's won 3 NBA championships, which is just as much as Bird, just as much as Jokic. I mean, but he's probably the most forgotten of them. And so it's a way of elevating him.
I was going to say, he's definitely not spoken of and revered the way that they are for winning 3 titles.
Not at all.
The book is Moses and the Doctor, 2 Men, 1 Championship, and the Birth of Modern Basketball. Luke Epplin, it's a great read. Everybody should go check it out. Thanks for giving us some time to talk about it.
All right. Thanks, guys.